"They're here to kill you," Jack Donovan whispered, and Emily Carter's coffee pot slipped from her fingers, shattering across the diner floor as her entire world collapsed in a single terrifying sentence. 24 years of ordinary life ended in that instant. She had no name for the fear rising in her chest, no explanation for why a stranger who called himself Dad, for the first time in his life, was staring past her shoulder at two men in denim jackets settling into a booth by the window, their eyes never once looking at a menu. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it means the world to me to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began 8 mornings earlier in a diner that Emily Carter thought was the safest place on earth. The bell above the door of the Copper Kettle Diner jingled at exactly 6:47 in the morning, same as it had every day for the past 3 years. Emily Carter didn't need to look up from the coffee pot she was refilling to know who had walked in. She'd learned the rhythm of Route 12 the way other people learn the rhythm of a song. The truckers who came through at dawn smelling of diesel and cigarettes. The retired school teacher who ordered the same egg white omelet every Tuesday. The Sinclair family who packed the corner booth after Sunday service. But this man was different. He had been coming in for exactly 1 week, and Emily still didn't know his name. He was big, not fat, but built like something out of another era. Shoulders that filled a doorway. Forearms marked with faded ink that told stories she couldn't read. He wore a black leather vest with patches she recognized but pretended not to. Hell's Angels. The words alone were enough to make half the regulars whisper behind their hands, enough to make old Mr. Pruitt from the hardware store clutch his newspaper a little tighter. But this man never raised his voice. He never made trouble. He simply sat in the corner booth, ordered black coffee and wheat toast, and watched the door. "Morning," Emily said, setting the coffee pot on the table without being asked. She'd stopped needing to ask what he wanted 3 days ago. "Morning," he replied, the same low rumble he always used, like gravel being turned over slow and careful. His eyes weren't on her. They were on the parking lot on the highway beyond it, scanning like a man checking a perimeter. "You want the toast today, or you finally going to try the pancakes?" Emily asked, forcing a smile, because that was her job. That was who she was, the girl who smiled at strangers and remembered how they liked their eggs and never let anybody see when she was tired or scared or lonely enough to cry in the walk-in freezer during her break. "Toast?" he said, then so quietly she almost missed it. "You look tired, kid." "Long shift," she said and turned to go. "Emily." She stopped. She hadn't told him her name. Her name tag, she realized, of course, her name tag. That's all it was. That's all it could be. "That's me," she said, forcing a laugh that came out thinner than she wanted. He didn't laugh back. He just nodded slow, like he was filing something away, and went back to watching the parking lot. That was Monday. By Wednesday, Emily had started to notice things about him that unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite name. He never sat with his back to the door. He always chose the booth that gave him a clear line of sight to both the front entrance and the kitchen exit. And every single morning, right around 7:15, his eyes would flick toward the highway, toward a specific stretch of road just past the old grain silo, and something in his jaw would tighten before he made himself relax again. "You waiting on somebody?" she'd asked him that morning, refilling his coffee for the 3rd time. "Something like that," he'd said. "They stand you up every day this week." For the first time, something like a smile had cracked across his weathered face. Something like that, too. She should have been afraid of him. Everyone else was. She'd seen the way conversations died a little when he walked past, the way mothers pulled their children a half step closer. But Emily wasn't afraid. There was something in the way he watched the room, not like a predator, but like a man standing guard over something precious, something he couldn't afford to lose. She just didn't know yet that the something precious was her. By Friday, Emily had stopped pretending she wasn't curious about him. She'd started lingering at his table longer than she needed to, asking questions he mostly deflected with short, gravelly answers. "You from around here?" she asked. "Been around," he said. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed, "it's not." "You gonna tell me your name eventually, or am I just gonna keep calling you Toast Guy in my head?" That earned her a real laugh, this time short and surprised, like it had been dragged out of him against his will. "Jack," he said. "Jack Donovan." "Emily Carter," she said, even though he already knew, and stuck out her hand like they were meeting for the first time. He looked at her hand for a long moment before he shook it, and something about the way his eyes went soft when their palms touched made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. "Nice to meet you properly, Jack Donovan." "Likewise, Emily Carter," he said, and there was something in the way he said her full name. Both names careful and deliberate that sent a small shiver down her spine, like he was tasting something he had been waiting a long, long time to say out loud. She didn't understand it then. She wouldn't understand it for 2 more days. Saturday was slow. The way Saturdays in a small Montana town tended to be, the diner half empty. By mid-morning, most of the breakfast rush already come and gone. Emily was wiping down the counter when she noticed Jack hadn't touched his toast. He was staring at his coffee like it held answers to questions he hadn't asked yet. "You okay?" she asked, setting down her rag. "Emily, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Your mother, she's still around?" The question hit her like a slap, unexpected and sharp. Emily's hands went still on the counter. "She passed when I was 6. Car accident." "And your father?" Emily felt her jaw tighten, an old, familiar ache rising in her chest, the kind of ache that came from a wound so old it had scarred over but never fully healed. "Never knew him. He left before I was born, from what my grandmother told me. Guess I wasn't worth sticking around for." Something flickered across Jack's face, pain sharp and sudden, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "That what she told you, that he left? That's what everyone told me," Emily said, an edge creeping into her voice now. "Why are you asking me this?" "Just curious," Jack said, but his eyes had gone somewhere far away, somewhere Emily couldn't follow. "You look like her, your mother." Emily's breath caught. "You knew my mother." Jack's eyes snapped back to her, and for just a moment Emily saw something in them she hadn't seen all week. Not the careful, guarded watchfulnesses, but something raw and unguarded and full of grief so old it had become part of the man's bones. "I knew a lot of people," he said too quickly, and picked up his coffee like the conversation was over. Emily wanted to push. Every instinct told her to push, to demand answers, to ask this stranger how he knew anything about a mother who'd been dead for 18 years. But something in his face stopped her, a warning, almost like he was standing at the edge of a door he wasn't ready to open. "Table 6 needs their check." Marion, the diner's owner, called from the register, and Emily was pulled away before she could ask another question. She spent the rest of her shift glancing at Jack's booth every few minutes, watching him sit there long after his coffee had gone cold, staring out at the highway like he was waiting for something to arrive or afraid of something that already had. Sunday, Jack didn't come in until almost 8, later than his usual time, and Emily noticed immediately that something was different. He moved differently, more alert, more coiled, like a man expecting trouble. He chose a different booth this time, one that gave him an even clearer view of both the parking lot and the kitchen door. "You're late," Emily said, trying to keep her voice light, even though her stomach had knotted itself into something uneasy the moment she'd seen his face. "Had some things to take care of," Jack said. His eyes were doing that thing again, scanning, cataloging. Watching the door every time the bell jingled. "Everything okay?" "It will be," he said, and it wasn't really an answer, but Emily let it go because there was something in his voice that told her not to push. Halfway through the morning, Emily noticed a car she didn't recognize pull into the parking lot. A dark sedan, windows tinted, the kind of vehicle that didn't belong on Route 12, where everyone drove pickup trucks and old sedans held together with duct tape and prayer. 2 men got out. They didn't come inside. They just stood by the car, talking low, glancing toward the diner every few seconds. Emily glanced at Jack. He'd gone completely still. His coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, his eyes locked on the 2 men through the window. "Jack, keep working, Emily," he said, his voice low and steady in a way that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Just keep working like nothing's wrong." "What's wrong?" "Nothing yet," he said. "Might not be nothing at all. Just keep an eye on that car for me, would you? Let me know if they come inside." Emily did as she was told, though her hands were shaking slightly as she cleared table 4, though her eyes kept flickering back to the parking lot every few seconds. The 2 men stood by the car for almost 10 minutes before finally getting back in and driving away. Jack exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath the entire time. "Who were they?" Emily asked, setting a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "Nobody," Jack said. "Wrong place probably, happens." But Emily didn't believe him. Not for a second. And that night, lying awake in her small apartment above the hardware store, she found herself thinking about Jack Donovan's careful watchfulness, about the way he'd asked about her parents, about the two men in the dark sedan who'd looked at the diner like they were casing it for something. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself a lot of things that night that turned out not to be true. Monday morning, the 8th day, started like any other. Emily arrived at the diner at 6:30, tied on her apron, started the coffee, and waited for Jack Donovan to walk through the door at 6:47 sharp, same as always. He didn't disappoint her. The bell jingled, and there he was, moving with that same watchful precision, sliding into his corner booth, eyes already sweeping the room. But something was wrong. Emily felt it the moment she looked at him, a tightness around his eyes, a grim set to his jaw that hadn't been there before. "Morning," she said, setting the coffee pot down. Jack didn't answer right away. He was looking past her toward the door, toward the highway beyond it. And when he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more urgent, stripped of the careful casualness he'd worn like armor all week. "Emily, sit down for a second." "I'm working, Jack. I can't just—" "Sit down," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her legs move before her mind caught up, made her slide into the booth across from him, even as every instinct screamed that something had shifted, that the ground beneath her feet was no longer solid. "You're scaring me," she whispered. "Good," Jack said. "You should be scared, but you need to listen to me very carefully, and you need to do exactly what I say because we don't have much time." "Jack, what is going on?" "Two men are going to walk through that door in the next few minutes." Jack said, his voice low and fast, now urgent in a way that sent ice through Emily's veins. "They're going to pretend to be customers. They're going to order coffee, maybe some food, and they're going to wait for the right moment. When that moment comes, they are going to try to kill you." Emily felt the blood drain from her face. That's not funny, Jack. That's not... Do I look like I'm joking?" His eyes locked onto hers, and there was nothing but deadly seriousness in them. Nothing but a fear so controlled it had become something harder. Something like steel. "Emily, I need you to trust me right now more than you've ever trusted anyone in your life. I know that's a lot to ask from a stranger. But I am not a stranger. Not really. Not in the ways that matter." "What are you talking about?" "There's no time to explain everything," Jack said, and his hand closed over hers on the table, warm and rough and steady. "But I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it now. When those men walk in, I need you to act like I'm your father. Can you do that for me?" "What?" "Act like I'm your father." Jack repeated each word, deliberate, urgent, like he was trying to plant them deep enough in her mind that fear wouldn't shake them loose. "Smile at me. Laugh at something I say. Make it look natural. Make it look like we've known each other your whole life. It's the only way I can get close enough to get you out of here safely." Emily's mind was racing, trying to make sense of a morning that had gone from ordinary to impossible in the span of 30 seconds. "Jack, I don't understand any of this." The bell above the door jingled. Jack's eyes flicked toward the entrance, and Emily watched his entire demeanor transform in an instant, the tension melting from his shoulders, a warm, easy smile spreading across his weathered face, the posture of a doting father settling in for breakfast with his daughter. "There they are," he said under his breath, still smiling, still radiating warmth for anyone watching. "Smile, sweetheart, right now. Smile like I just told you something funny." Emily forced a laugh that felt like broken glass in her throat, forced her face into something resembling oath, even as her heart had hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. Two men walked through the door, mid-30s, dressed like they belonged on a construction site, flannel shirts and worn jeans. Nothing about them that should have raised alarm. They took a booth near the window, ordered coffee from Marion without so much as glancing in Emily and Jack's direction. But Emily saw it. She saw the way one of them adjusted his jacket as he sat, the telltale bulge at his hip that no amount of flannel could quite disguise. She saw the way their eyes moved around the diner in slow, practiced sweeps, not the casual glance of hungry travelers, but the calculated assessment of men counting exits, counting witnesses, counting the seconds until the moment was right. "Jack," she whispered, her smile still frozen in place. "What do we do?" "We finish our coffee," Jack said, his voice pitched low, still smiling like a proud father sharing a joke with his little girl. "We act completely normal. And when I give you the signal, you're going to get up and you're going to walk calmly toward the kitchen like you're going to check on an order. You understand me. And then what?" "And then you're going to run," Jack said, And you're not going to stop running until you're in my truck, which is parked around back by the dumpster. Keys are already in it. If anything happens to me, you get in that truck and you jump and you don't look back no matter what you hear. Jack, I can't just leave you. You can and you will because that's what he would have wanted, Jack said, and something in his voice cracked just slightly, just enough for Emily to hear the grief buried underneath 24 years of careful control. Who, Emily whispered, who would have wanted that? Jack's eyes met hers, and for just a moment, the warmth in them wasn't performance anymore. It was real aching, decades deep. Your father, he said. Emily's entire body went cold. My father is dead. He left before I was born. That's a lie, Jack said, his voice barely audible now. His eyes flicking back toward the two men at the window who were sipping their coffee with a patience that felt like a countdown clock ticking somewhere just out of sight. Your father didn't leave you, Emily. He died trying to protect you. And I've spent every day since making sure nobody finished what they started. Emily opened her mouth to demand more, to demand answers to a lifetime of questions that had just cracked open in front of her like an earthquake, but Jack's hand tightened over hers, a silent warning. One of the men at the window had stood up. Now, Jack breathed, his smile never wavering, even as his eyes went hard and cold. Go, Emily. Kitchen. Now. Emily's legs moved before her mind caught up, sliding out of the booth, forcing her feet into the casual, unhurried walk of a waitress, checking on an order, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run, to sprint, to get as far away from that diner as physically possible. Behind her, she heard Jack's chair scrape back. She heard his voice, still warm, still performing normalcy for anyone watching. Gentlemen, can I help you with something? Just need to use the restroom, one of the men said, his voice pleasant, unremarkable, and utterly unconvincing to ears that had spent the last week learning the difference between Jack's careful calm and genuine calm. Emily pushed through the kitchen door, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack. Miguel, the line cook, looked up from the grill, startled. Emily, you okay? You're white as a... Miguel, I need you to call 911, Emily said, her voice shaking. Right now, tell them there are armed men at the Copper Kettle Diner. What, Emily? What's going on? She didn't have time to explain. She could hear raised voices from the dining room. Now could hear Jack's voice, no longer warm, no longer performing hard and commanding in a way that made her blood run cold. Emily, go! She ran. She burst through the back door into the cold morning air, her sneakers slipping on gravel as she sprinted toward the dumpster, toward the old pickup truck. Jack had mentioned her mind, a chaotic storm of terror and disbelief. Her father. Jack had said her father. Her father who had abandoned her before she was even born, who her grandmother had spoken of only in bitter clipped sentences, who Emily had spent 24 years believing hadn't wanted her at all. Behind her, she heard the crash, glass shattering a table, overturning a man's voice, shouting something she couldn't make out. She reached the truck, wrenched the door open, and scrambled inside, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to find the ignition. Through the diner's back windows, she caught fragmented glimpses of chaos, Jack's massive frame moving with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for a man his size. One of the strangers slamming into the counter, Marion screaming, other customers scrambling for the exits. Come on, Emily whispered, twisting the key, the engine roaring to life, just as the back door of the diner burst open. It was Jack, blood running from a cut above his eyebrow, his shirt torn at the shoulder, moving toward her at a dead sprint. Drive, he bellowed. Emily didn't think. She threw the truck into gear and stomped the gas as Jack wrenched open the passenger door and threw himself inside the truck, already lurching forward, gravel spraying behind them as they tore out of the parking lot. Go, go, go! Jack shouted, twisting in his seat to look behind them. Emily's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't have said when she'd started crying. Jack, what just happened? What is happening? Turn left up ahead. Jack said, his voice tight with pain but steady, still commanding, still in control, even as blood dripped from his eyebrow onto his leather vest. Highway 9. We need to put distance between us and them. Those men, they were going to... Emily's voice broke. They were going to kill me. You said they were going to kill me. Yes, Jack said simply, no attempt to soften it, no attempt to lie to her the way everyone else in her life apparently had. They were. Why would anyone want to kill me? I'm nobody, Jack. I'm a waitress in Montana. You're not nobody, Jack said, and something in his voice made Emily glance at him despite the road, despite the chaos, despite every reason to keep her eyes forward. His face had gone soft, grief-worn, ancient, with a sorrow that had nothing to do with the blood on his forehead. You are Daniel Carter's daughter, and that name is worth more to certain people than every dollar they've ever stolen. Daniel Carter, Emily repeated the name, feeling foreign and impossible in her mouth. That's not my father's name. I don't even know my father's name. Nobody ever... Pull over, Jack said suddenly. What, Jack? They could still be following. Pull over, Emily, Jack said again, softer this time, and something about his tone made her ease the truck onto the shoulder gravel, crunching beneath the tires as they came to a stop on the empty stretch of Highway 9 morning sun, slanting gold across the wheat fields on either side of the road. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emily's hands were still shaking on the wheel. Jack sat beside her, blood drying on his temple, his massive frame somehow smaller now, more tired, more human than the careful, watchful stranger who'd sat in her diner booth for 8 straight mornings. 24 years ago, Jack finally said, his voice rough, I made a promise to your father, the best friend I ever had, a man who rode beside me for years before either one of us knew what we were really riding into. Jack, I don't understand any of this. I know, he said. I know you don't. And I owe you every answer, Emily, every single one, because you've spent your whole life believing a lie that nearly got you killed today. But right now, we need to keep moving, because those men aren't going to stop looking for you, and there are people who need to know that you're safe. What people? Jack reached beneath his torn vest and pulled out an old battered cell phone, the kind Emily hadn't seen in years, thumbing through contacts with hands that trembled slightly, despite his effort to control them. My brothers, he said, the men who've been helping me watch over you since before you could walk. It's time they knew the day we all hoped would never come has finally arrived. He pressed the phone to his ear, and Emily watched his face as someone answered on the other end, watched 24 years of careful, silent vigilance crack open into something raw and urgent. It's Jack, he said into the phone. They found her. They found Daniel's girl. Emily's stomach dropped through the floor of the truck. I need everyone, Jack continued, his eyes meeting Emily's across the cab, steady and fierce, despite the blood still trickling down his temple. Every rider we've got. It's time we finished what Daniel started. He ended the call and looked at Emily for a long moment, something like an apology in his eyes. I know this is a lot, he said quietly. I know I just turned your whole world upside down in the span of one morning. But I need you to hear one thing before we go any further, and I need you to believe it, because it's the only true thing anyone has ever told you about your father. What? He never left you, Jack said, his voice breaking on the words like a dam finally giving way after decades of holding back a flood. He loved you more than his own life. And everything that's happening right now, every bit of danger you're in, it's because Daniel Carter refused to let evil men win. He gave everything to protect people he'd never even met. And in the end, he gave his life trying to make sure you'd grow up safe. Emily felt tears spilling down her cheeks. Grief for a father she'd never known, crashing into hers all at once, tangled up with terror and confusion and a desperate need to understand how her entire life had been built on a foundation of lies she never knew existed. Tell me everything, she whispered. Please, Jack, I need to know who my father really was. Jack looked out at the wheat fields, stretching gold and endless toward the mountains. And when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of 24 years of silence finally breaking. Your father wasn't just my best friend, he said. He was the bravest man I ever knew. And the men who tried to kill you this morning, they're the same men who murdered him. The truck sat idling on the empty shoulder of Highway 9 morning light, stretching long and gold across the Montana wheat fields. And somewhere behind them, sirens began to wail in the distance. But Emily Carter barely heard them. She was looking at a stranger who had just become the only family she had left in the world, waiting for him to tell her the truth about a father she'd spent her entire life believing had never wanted her at all. Jack Donovan took a breath, steadied his bleeding hands against the steering wheel, and began to speak. It started almost 25 years ago, he said, in a clubhouse 200 miles from here, when your father walked in wearing a Hell's Angels patch he had no business earning, because everything about the man was a lie built to save people just like you. Jack Donovan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, and for a moment he said nothing. Like the words themselves cost him something he wasn't sure he could afford to spend. Your father and I met in a bar outside Billings, he finally said. 1999. I was 26 years old already, 3 years deep into the club already so far, in that I didn't know where the man ended and the patch began. Daniel walked in wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big and a look in his eyes like he was trying to prove something to somebody who wasn't even in the room. He wanted to join the Hells Angels, Emily asked, her voice still shaking, still trying to fit this new father-shaped hole into a lifetime of empty space. That's what everybody thought, Jack said. That's what I thought for the first 6 months. Man could ride like he'd been born on 2 wheels, never backed down from a fight, never flinched when things got ugly. By all appearances, Daniel Carter was exactly what he seemed to be, another lost soul looking for brotherhood in a world that hadn't given him much of anything else. But he wasn't. No, Jack said, he wasn't. Took me 2 years to find that out, and when I did, it nearly ended both of us. Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. 3 missed calls from Marion, probably wondering why her waitress had vanished into thin air during the middle of a shift. Why there were police cars now surrounding a diner with a broken window and an overturned table. She silenced it without looking, because none of that mattered anymore. Because the only thing that mattered was the man sitting beside her, with blood drying on his temple, and 2.5 decades of secrets finally spilling out of him. Keep going, she said, please. Jack glanced in the rear-view mirror, checking the empty highway behind them out of habit more than fear now, and continued. There was a rumor going around the club back then, he said. Talk of money moving through legitimate businesses that had no business generating that kind of cash. Trucking companies, construction outfits, a dozen different fronts, all connected back to men who never showed their faces at the clubhouse, but whose names carried weight nobody dared question. I didn't think much of it at the time. Wasn't my business to think much of it. I rode, I worked, I kept my head down. And Daniel started asking questions, Jack said. Quiet ones, careful ones. I thought he was just curious, same as any of us get curious when something doesn't add up. Took me a long while to understand he wasn't curious at all. He was gathering. Gathering what? Evidence, Jack said, and the word landed heavy in the cab of the truck, heavier than Emily expected. Your father wasn't some lost drifter who wandered into the club looking for family Emily. He was a federal informant, had been recruited 2 years before I ever met him back when he was working construction in Billings, and stumbled onto records he shouldn't have seen, records that led him straight into the middle of the largest organized crime investigation this state has ever known. Emily's breath caught somewhere in her throat. My father was he was working for the government. Not exactly working for them, Jack said. More like he made them a deal. See, your father found something he couldn't unsee, Emily. Financial records tying 6 respected businessmen, men who sat on city councils, men who donated to churches, and little league teams, tying them straight to a criminal network, moving drugs, guns, and worse through 3 states. He could have walked away, could have buried what he found and gone on living a quiet, ordinary life. But he didn't. No, Jack said, and something like pride, old and worn, crept into his voice. He didn't. He went to the FBI instead, and they told him the only way to build a case strong enough to take down the whole network was from the inside. So they asked him to infiltrate the one organization that had legitimate ties running through every level of that criminal enterprise. The Hells Angels, Emily whispered. The Hells Angels, Jack confirmed. Not the club as a whole, understand. Most of my brothers were exactly what they appeared to be. Men trying to build something like family in a world that hadn't given them much else. But there was a faction, a cell within the club quietly working alongside a man named Victor Kane, laundering money, moving product, making problems disappear when problems needed disappearing. Your father spent 2 years building trust with exactly the wrong people. All so he could bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The truck sat idling on the shoulder, and somewhere in the distance, the sirens Emily had heard earlier faded into silence, replaced by something worse. The low mechanical drone of a helicopter passing somewhere overhead, and Jack's eyes snapped upward, tracking the sound with the same predatory focus he'd shown at the diner window. Jack, it's not ours, he said, after a moment exhaling. Medical chopper, probably. Somebody's having a worse morning than us, if you can believe that. He tried for a smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. You said you found out, Emily pressed, about what he really was. How? Jack's jaw tightened. Your father made a mistake. Not a big one, the kind of mistake anybody makes when they're carrying a secret too heavy for one man to hold alone. I caught him copying documents late one night at the clubhouse, papers he had no business having access to. Confronted him about it in the parking lot, figured I'd caught myself a thief, somebody skimming from the club. What happened? He told me the truth, Jack said simply. Right there in that parking lot at 2 a.m. with nobody around but the two of us, and about 1,000 ways that conversation could have ended real bad for him. Told me everything, who he was working for, what he'd found, what it would mean for men I called brothers if the truth ever came out. Why would he trust you with that? You could have killed him. You could have told Victor Kane or whoever, and he didn't have a choice, Jack said quietly. And honestly, Emily, I think some part of him was tired. Tired of carrying it alone. 2 years is a long time to lie to men who trust you even when those lies are in service of something righteous. He looked me dead in the eye and said, Jack, I know what I'm asking. I know you could end me right here, but I've watched you long enough to know you're not like them. You didn't sign up for what Victor's building. You signed up for brotherhood. And he was right. God help me, he was right. So you helped him. I helped him, Jack confirmed, became the only other person on this earth who knew what your father really was. We spent the next 2 years building that case together, brick by brick, careful as bomb disposal, because one wrong move and we'd have both ended up in shallow graves next to whoever Victor Kane decided needed silencing that week. Emily sat with that for a long moment, watching the wheat fields sway gold and endless. In the morning wind, trying to reconcile the image of a father who'd abandoned her before birth with a man who had apparently risked everything for years to bring down men more dangerous than she could have imagined. He met my mother during all this, she said slowly, working it out. Didn't he? Jack's face softened. 3rd year into the investigation, your mother was working as a paralegal for a firm downtown, completely unconnected to any of it. Daniel used to talk about her like she was the only good thing that had ever happened to him, like meeting her was proof that somewhere underneath all the lying and the danger there was still a real life waiting for him if he could just survive long enough to claim it. What was she like? Emily's voice cracked on the question. 24 years of grief for a mother she barely remembered rising up all at once. Fierce, Jack said, and for the first time all morning, something like genuine warmth broke through the grim mask he'd been wearing since the diner. Smart as hell. She figured out something was wrong with Daniel about 6 months into their relationship. Not the specifics, but enough to know he was carrying a weight he wasn't sharing. She gave him an ultimatum, told him she wasn't going to spend her life loving a man made of half-truths. What did he do? He told her everything, Jack said. Against every protocol, against everything the Bureau warned him about, he sat her down and told her the truth, same as he'd told me. And instead of running, which she had every right to do, she stayed. Told him if he was going to risk his life trying to do something good in this world, she wanted to be standing beside him when it mattered. Emily was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks as she tried to picture two people she'd never really known brave in ways that made her own fear feel small and manageable by comparison. They got married quietly, Jack continued. Small ceremony, nobody from the club invited except me. And about a year later, your mother found out she was pregnant with you. And that's when everything changed. That's when everything changed. Jack agreed, his voice dropping lower, heavier. Your father had spent years willing to risk his own life for this case. But the moment he found out he was going to be a father, something shifted. He started talking about getting out, about finishing what he'd started and disappearing somewhere safe with your mother and the baby on the way. Problem was, by then we were close. Too close. We had names, dates, wire transfers. Enough evidence sitting in a federal case file to bury Victor Kane and every corrupt official on his payroll for the rest of their natural lives. So why didn't it happen? Why didn't they just arrest them? Jack's hands tightened on the wheel again, knuckles going white. Because 6 weeks before the case was supposed to go to a federal grand jury, somebody talked. The words hung in the truck's cab like a held breath, and Emily felt every hair on her arm stand up. Who? We never found out for certain, Jack said, and there was old, unresolved rage buried in his voice, the kind that had been simmering for 24 years with nowhere to go. Could have been someone at the Bureau. Could have been someone inside the club who put pieces together they weren't supposed to see. All I know is one night in October, 3 men Victor Kane trusted with his darkest secrets showed up at the safe house where your father and mother were supposed to be staying. Emily's whole body went cold, dread pooling in her stomach like ice water. They weren't there. No, Jack said. By pure God-given luck, they weren't there. Your mother had gone into early labor 2 days before, and Daniel had taken her to a hospital 40 miles outside the city, terrified something would go wrong, terrified enough to abandon protocol for one night to make sure his wife and unborn daughter were safe. It was the only reason either of them survived what happened next. What happened? Victor's men burned that safe house to the ground, Jack said flatly. Torched it with enough accelerant that federal investigators initially assumed Daniel and your mother had died inside. It bought your parents almost 48 hours before Victor realized his mistake. 48 hours your father used to get you and your mother somewhere safe, and to make sure I understood exactly what needed to happen if the worst ever came to pass. The promise, Emily whispered. You said something about a promise at the diner. Jack nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone rough, worn thin by 2.5 decades of carrying a vow he'd never once been allowed to set down. Your father found me 2 nights after the fire, he said. Found me at 3 a.m, half out of his mind, with fear, holding you a baby, not even a week old, while your mother slept in the car outside, exhausted, past the point of standing. He told me the case was blown. Told me Victor knew there was a rat somewhere close to him, and it was only a matter of time before the net closed. And then he asked me for the only thing he had left to give. What did he ask? He asked me to disappear from his life, Jack said. Completely. No more meetings, no more contact, nothing that could ever connect Jack Donovan to Daniel Carter. In any official record, any witness statement, any surveillance photo, Victor's people might have compiled. And in exchange, he made me swear on everything I held sacred that if anything ever happened to him, if Victor's men ever finished what they'd started, I would find you. I would watch over you. I would make sure his daughter grew up safe, even if she never knew my name, even if she never knew the truth about who her father really was. Emily was sobbing now, quiet, shuddering sobs that shook her whole body. 24 years of believing she'd been abandoned, crashing headlong into the truth that she had been protected, silently, invisibly, relentlessly, protected by a man who had sacrificed his own presence in her life to keep her alive. I said yes. Jack continued, his own voice thick now, cracking under the weight of the memory. Of course I said yes. And 3 weeks later, Daniel Carter walked into a meeting with federal agents to hand over the last pieces of evidence needed to finalize the case against Victor Kane's entire operation. He never walked out. The silence that followed stretched long and unbearable, filled only by the distant hush of wind moving through wheat fields, by the ragged sound of Emily's breathing as she tried to absorb the full weight of everything Jack had just told her. He's dead, she finally said, though it wasn't really a question. My father is really dead. 24 years, Jack confirmed softly. Body was never recovered. Officially, he's still listed as missing, presumed deceased. Victor made sure there'd be no evidence, no trial, no justice, just a young widow and a newborn baby left to figure out how to survive without him. My mother, Emily said slowly, something clicking into place with horrible clarity. She died in a car accident when I was 6. Was that really an accident? Jack's expression darkened, and the answer in his eyes told Emily everything, before he even opened his mouth to say it. I don't know for certain, he said carefully. Your mother was careful, Emily. She knew the danger never fully went away even after Daniel was gone. She moved you twice before that accident, changed your last name, once tried everything she could to stay invisible. But Victor Kane's people have long memories and longer patience. I've never been able to prove it was anything but a tragic accident, but I've also never quite been able to believe it was a coincidence. Emily pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold herself together, trying to process a lifetime of grief that had just multiplied in the span of one impossible morning. So that's it. Both my parents murdered, and I've just been walking around my whole life thinking I was some kind of unwanted mistake nobody cared enough to stick around for. You were the single most important thing your father ever protected, Jack said fiercely, reaching across the cab to grip her hand, his weathered face fierce with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Everything he did, every risk, every sacrifice, every year of his life, he gave to that investigation. It was all so that someday, somehow, a little girl he barely got to hold would grow up safe in a world with a few less monsters in it. He didn't leave you, Emily. He died loving you so much, he was willing to disappear from your life entirely just to keep you breathing. Emily let out a sound that was half sob, half broken laugh. 24 years of resentment toward a father she'd never known, crumbling into something far more complicated. Grief, gratitude, and rage all tangled together into a knot she didn't know how to untangle. "And you," she said, looking up at him, "you've been watching me this whole time for 24 years. Every school," Jack confirmed, "every apartment, every club, every man who ever tried to hurt you or take advantage of you. I want you to know I was closer than you ever realized, watching from a distance, making sure nothing happened to you that I could prevent. Wasn't always perfect, wasn't always close enough. But I never once broke that promise, Emily. Not once in 24 years." Before Emily could respond, Jack's phone buzzed violently in the truck's cup holder, the screen lighting up with a name that made his entire body tense. "That's Bear," he said, answering immediately, putting the call on speaker with hands that had gone steady again. Professional, the grief momentarily shelved in favor of whatever crisis was unfolding on the other end of the line. "Jack!" The voice on the phone was rough, urgent, carrying the particular strain of a man delivering bad news he wished he didn't have to deliver. "We got a problem, big one. Talk to me. Scanners lighting up. Local PD responding to your little incident at the diner, but that's not the problem. We picked up chatter on a frequency we've been monitoring for years, Victor's people. Jack, they know it's her. They know she's with you, and they've already got teams mobilizing out of 3 different counties." Emily's stomach dropped. "How many teams?" Bear's voice, tinny through the phone speaker, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the kind of hesitation that told Emily the answer was worse than she wanted to hear. "Best estimate right now, at least a dozen men. Could be more. Victor's been quietly building his security detail for the last 5 years, ever since rumors started circulating that Daniel's evidence might still be out there somewhere. This isn't some local muscle, Jack. This is his A-team." Jack's jaw clenched, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, again scanning the empty highway behind them with renewed intensity. "Where's the nearest team?" 20 minutes out from your last known location, maybe less," Bear said. "Jack, we need to move. I've got riders converging from Bozeman, from Missoula, from as far as Spokane. Everybody who ever rode with Daniel, everybody who's owed you a favor over the years they're coming. But we need a safe location, and we need one now." "The old cabin," Jack said. 12 miles north off Forest Route 8. Nobody but the club knows that place still exists." "You sure that's safe?" "Nothing's safe anymore, Bear, but it's the safest option we've got. Meet us there. Bring everyone." Jack ended the call and looked at Emily, whose face had gone pale with the reality of the danger closing in around them, a danger that had already tried to kill her once that morning and clearly wasn't finished trying. "We need to move," he said, throwing the truck back into gear. "Right now." The tires spun briefly against gravel before catching, and the truck lurched forward onto the empty highway. Jack's eyes constantly flicking between the road ahead and the mirrors behind his massive hands, steady on the wheel despite the blood still crusted along his temple. "Jack," Emily said, gripping the door handle as they picked up speed, "you said Victor's people have been looking for evidence. What evidence? What could possibly still exist after 24 years? Jack's expression tightened, something calculating and careful crossing his features. "Your father was smart, Emily, smarter than anyone gave him credit for. Before that final meeting with federal agents, the one he never walked away from, he told me he'd made a backup, a fail-safe in case something went wrong." "What kind of fail-safe?" "He never told me the specifics," Jack admitted. "Said it was safer if I didn't know in case Victor's people ever came for me too. All I know is he mentioned a place somewhere connected to your mother, somewhere only the 2 of them would ever think to look. Said if anything ever happened to him, the truth would still be out there waiting for the right person to find it. And you think that's what Victor's men are really after? Not just to kill me, but to find whatever my father hid." "I think," Jack said grimly, "that Victor Kane has spent 24 years wondering if Daniel Carter really did burn everything before he died. Or if somewhere out there a ticking time bomb has been sitting quiet waiting for the day his daughter grew up and started asking questions. And I think this morning when you finally started asking those questions to me, somebody's ear was a lot closer than we realized." The words settled over Emily like a physical weight, and she found herself staring out the window at the passing wheat fields with new eyes, eyes that understood for the first time that her entire life had been a countdown clock, ticking toward this exact moment, and she'd never even known it was running. "How did they find out?" she asked. How did they know today was the day you said you'd been careful for 24 years? Jack's face darkened with something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. That's the question keeping me up at night too, kid. Only thing that changed recently was... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. What changed? 3 weeks ago, Jack said slowly, somebody accessed old federal case files related to your father's investigation. Files that were supposed to be sealed, buried so deep in a records archive that nobody without serious clearance should have been able to touch them. I have a contact who still owes me favors from the old days. He flagged it, told me somebody with law enforcement credentials had requested access. Someone on Victor's payroll, Emily said, understanding dawning cold and sharp. That's my read on it too, Jack confirmed, which means Victor's had 3 weeks to prepare for exactly this moment. And we've had 8 days of me sitting in a diner trying to figure out the right way to tell a stranger her entire life was a lie without sending her running straight into the danger I was trying to protect her from. The truck crested a hill and Jack's eyes flicked sharply to the rearview mirror, his entire body going rigid. We've got company, he said, voice suddenly flat and cold. Emily twisted in her seat to look behind them and her heart lurched into her throat. A black SUV had appeared on the highway behind them, closing distance with an aggressive, deliberate speed that left no room for doubt about its intentions. Jack. Hold on, he said, and stomped the gas pedal to the floor, the old truck's engine roaring in protest as it surged forward, Emily's body slamming back against the seat. Is it them? Is it Victor's men? Don't know, don't care, Jack said. Eyes locked on the mirror, calculating distance and speed, with a focus that reminded Emily for just a moment of the watchful stranger who'd sat in her diner booth for 8 straight days. We're not sticking around to find out, politely. The SUV closed the gap with terrifying speed, and Emily watched in horror as it pulled up alongside them, matching their speed, the passenger window rolling down to reveal a man with cold, professional eyes and something dark and metallic glinting in his hand. Get down, Jack roared, and Emily dove sideways just as the world exploded into gunfire, the truck's back window shattering into a spray of glass that rained across the cab. Jack, I'm fine, stay down, he shouted, wrenching the wheel hard to the right, the truck's tires screaming as he forced the SUV to swerve or risk collision. The SUV fell back momentarily, and Jack used the gap to cut sharply onto a narrow side road, gravel and dust exploding behind them as the truck fishtailed onto the new path. Where are we going? Emily screamed over the roar of the engine glass still crunching beneath her feet. Anywhere they're not, Jack shouted back, checking the mirror again, his relief audible when the SUV failed to make the same turn, disappearing behind a cloud of dust and distance. That should buy us a few minutes, not more. Emily's whole body was shaking, adrenaline and terror mixing into something that made her hands feel disconnected from her body. That actually just happened. Somebody just shot at us. Welcome to the world your father spent his whole life trying to keep you out of, Jack said grimly, though his voice carried no satisfaction, only old weary grief. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry it caught up with you today of all days. Don't apologize, she said, surprising herself with the sudden steel in her own voice. You saved my life, twice now in one morning. Just tell me what we do next. Jack glanced at her, something like pride flickering behind the fear and adrenaline still etched across his face. You sound like your mother right now. She used to get that same look scared out of her mind and refusing to let it stop her anyway. What do we do? Emily pressed. We get to the cabin, Jack said. We regroup with my brothers, and then we figure out exactly what your father hid 24 years ago before Victor Kane's people find it first. The truck barreled down the narrow forest road, pine trees rising thick and dark on either side, and Emily found herself gripping the door handle with white knuckles, trying to process a morning that had transformed her entire understanding of who she was, who her parents had been, and just how much danger had been quietly circling her for the whole of her unremarkable, ordinary life. Jack, she said after a few minutes of tense silence, what happens if we can't find it, what Daniel hid? Jack's expression turned grim, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. Then Victor Kane spends the rest of his life terrified it might surface someday, and you spend the rest of your life running from men who will never stop hunting you as long as they believe that evidence exists. Finding it isn't just about justice for your father anymore, Emily. It's the only way you ever get your life back. They drove in silence for several more minutes, the adrenaline slowly beginning to ebb, leaving Emily hollowed out and exhausted in its wake. She stared at her own hands, still trembling faintly in her lap, and tried to reconcile the ordinary waitress she'd been 24 hours ago with the woman she'd become in the span of one impossible morning, a woman with a dead hero for a father, a guardian angel in biker leather, and a criminal empire hunting her across the state of Montana. "There," Jack said, finally nodding toward a barely visible turnoff nearly swallowed by overgrown brush. "That's us." The truck bounced down a rutted dirt path for almost a quarter mile before a small weathered cabin came into view, tucked deep into the pines, nearly invisible from any angle except straight on. Several motorcycles were already parked outside, along with 2 pickup trucks, and a handful of leather-clad men stood near the entrance, expressions tight with worry that shifted instantly to relief when Jack's truck came into view. "That's Bear," Jack said, nodding toward an enormous man with a gray beard who was already striding toward the truck before it had fully stopped. "And that's Preacher beside him. Don't let the name fool you, man's got a mouth like a sailor. Oh, sailor, these are your father's brothers, Emily, some of the last people on earth who remember him the way he really was." Bear reached the truck as Jack threw it into park, his weathered face creased with concern as he took in the shattered back window, the blood on Jack's temple. "Jesus, Jack, what happened?" "They found us on the highway," Jack said, climbing out, moving immediately to open Emily's door with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the last hour. "We're okay, banged up, but okay." Bear's eyes shifted to Emily, and something in his weathered face softened immediately, decades of hardness melting into something almost reverent. "My God," he breathed. "She's got Daniel's eyes." "Everybody." "This is Emily," Jack said, one hand resting protectively at her shoulder as more men emerged from the cabin, forming a loose, watchful circle around them. "Daniel's daughter." A ripple moved through the gathered bikers. Disbelief, awe, grief, all crossing weathered faces in quick succession, and Emily felt suddenly overwhelmingly exposed, standing at the center of 24 strangers who apparently knew more about her own father than she'd learned in 24 years of living. 24 years, Bear said quietly, shaking his head. "We always wondered. Hoped, I guess, that somewhere out there Daniel's girl was living a good life, safe and far away from all this. She was, Jack said, until this morning." Preacher sagged forward, an older man with kind eyes set into a weathered, sun-worn face, extending a hand toward Emily with careful respect. "Ma'am, I don't know if Jack's told you much about what your father meant to this club, but I want you to know the day we heard he was gone, we buried a piece of ourselves right alongside him. Man had more courage than any 10 of us combined." Emily shook his hand, feeling tears threatening again despite her exhaustion. "I didn't even know his name until an hour ago." A murmur of quiet sorrow moved through the group at that admission, and Bear's jaw tightened with something like old familiar anger. "That's Victor Kane's doing," he said. "Man spent 24 years making sure Daniel Carter's name meant nothing to the one person who should have grown up knowing exactly who he was." "We don't have time for old grief right now," Jack said, though his voice carried no unkindness, only urgency. "Victor's people already made one attempt on Emily's life today, and they came close to succeeding on the highway not 20 minutes ago. We need eyes on every road leading into this valley, and we need to figure out what Daniel hid before Victor's people beat us to it." "What exactly are we looking for?" Bear asked. "That's the problem," Jack admitted. "I don't know. Daniel never told me specifics, just that it was tied to something only he and Emily's mother would understand. Some kind of location, some kind of marker that would make sense to family and nobody else." Every eye in the small clearing turned toward Emily, and she felt a sudden crushing weight of expectations settle onto her shoulders, as if somewhere in the fog of a childhood spent motherless, spent believing her father had simply never wanted her. The answer to a 24-year-old mystery might be waiting buried just out of reach. "I don't know anything," she said, panic edging into her voice. "I don't remember my mother, not really. I was 6 when she died. I don't have any memories of my father at all. How am I supposed to know where he'd hide something like that?" "You might know more than you think," Jack said gently. "Your grandmother raised you after your mother passed, didn't she?" "Yes, but she never talked about my parents. Ever. I used to ask and she'd just shut down. Change the subject. I always figured it hurt too much for her to talk about." "Or she was protecting you," Jack said quietly. "Same as everyone else in your life has apparently been doing without you ever knowing it. Emily, is there anything at all your grandmother left behind Photos, letters, boxes she never let you go through. Emily's mind raced backward through years of memory, searching for something, anything that might connect to the impossible puzzle unfolding around her. And then slowly something surfaced, a memory she hadn't thought about in years. "There's a storage unit," she said slowly. "My grandmother paid for it for years before she passed, even after she moved into assisted living. I always assumed it was just old furniture stuff from the house she couldn't bear to throw away. I inherited the unit when she died, but I never actually went through everything inside. Couldn't bring myself to." Jack's eyes lit up with something like hope for the first time since the diner, exchanging a quick, charged glance with Bear. "Where?" he asked. "Billings," Emily said. "About 2 hours from here." "That's it," Jack said, turning to the assembled men with new urgency. "That's where we start. Bear, I need you to get eyes on that storage facility immediately, quiet as you can manage. If Victor's people are as far along as I think they are, they may already know about it." "On it," Bear said, already pulling out his phone. "Jack," Emily said, a new fear rising in her chest. "What if they get there first? What if whatever my father hid is already gone?" Jack turned to her, his weathered face set with grim determination, 24 years of careful watching, finally giving way to action. "Then we make sure they don't," he said. "Emily, your father survived 2 years undercover inside one of the most dangerous organizations in this country, gathering evidence strong enough to end Victor Kane's empire, all while protecting the people he loved most. He was smarter than Victor Kane ever gave him credit for. I don't believe for 1 second that whatever he hid is sitting in some unlocked storage unit waiting to be stumbled upon. He would have built layers, protections, something only someone who truly understood him could ever find. So what do? "We go to Billings," Jack said, "together, and we find out exactly what your father was willing to die protecting." As the men around them began mobilizing, checking weapons, starting engines, forming a convoy that would escort Emily and Jack across 2 hours of dangerous highway, Emily found herself staring at the weathered cabin, at the dozens of leather-clad strangers who had apparently spent decades as invisible guardians in a life she thought was entirely her own, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not just grief anymore, and not just fear, something that felt unmistakably like purpose. "Jack," she said quietly as he helped her back into a different truck, one with an intact back window, "and Bear now riding shotgun for extra protection when we get there, when we find whatever he left behind. What happens after that?" Jack's expression turned solemn, ancient grief mixing with fierce, protective determination. As he looked at her, really looked at her the way a father might look at a daughter, he'd finally, after 24 long years, been given permission to claim. "After that," he said, "we finish what your father started. We bring Victor Kane's entire empire crashing down around him, and we make damn sure the world finally knows the truth about the bravest man I ever called brother." The convoy pulled out from the hidden clearing, motorcycles rumbling like distant thunder as they wound down through the forest and back toward the highway, toward Billings, toward answers that had been waiting 24 years to be found, and toward a confrontation that Emily Carter, 24 hours ago just an ordinary waitress in an ordinary diner, was only now beginning to understand she'd been destined for since the moment she was born. Behind them, unseen, a dark sedan idled at the edge of the forest road, a man pressing a phone to his ear, his voice low and urgent as he relayed a single devastating piece of information to someone waiting on the other end of the line. "She's heading to Billings," he said. "Storage facility. We need to get there first." The convoy had been on the highway for almost 40 minutes when Bear's phone rang, and Emily watched Jack's shoulders tense the moment he saw his old friend's face change. "Talk to me," Bear said into the phone, and then went very quiet, listening, his knuckles whitening around the device. "What?" Emily asked, leaning forward from the back seat. "What's wrong?" Bear lowered the phone slowly. "Storage facility already has unfamiliar vehicles parked outside. 2 SUVs, dark windows sitting there like they're waiting for something." "Or someone," Jack said grimly. "How could they possibly know about the storage unit?" Emily asked, panic sharpening her voice. "I only just remembered it myself." Jack's jaw worked, and when he spoke, his voice carried a heaviness that told Emily he already suspected an answer he didn't want to say out loud. "Because somebody's been listening. Either they tapped into the same records I did when I found the case file accessed 3 weeks ago, or," he stopped. "Or what? Or somebody inside this convoy isn't who they say they are." Bear finished for him, and the words landed like a physical blow. several riders exchanging uneasy glances through the rearview mirrors of their trucks. "That's not possible," Jack said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Every man in this convoy has ridden with me for years. Decades, some of them." 24 years is a long time for a man to keep his silence, Jack Bear said quietly. Long enough for anybody to get tired. Long enough for money to matter more than memory. Emily felt sick, the betrayal of a lifetime she hadn't even known existed, compounding on itself layer after layer, until she wasn't sure which was worse, believing her father had abandoned her, or discovering that the men sworn to protect her might be compromised too. "We can't go to the storage unit," Jack said finally. "Not directly, not with company already waiting." "Then what do we do?" Emily asked. "Jack, if we don't get there, if they get whatever's inside first." "We're not walking into an ambush," Jack said firmly. "Bear, get eyes on that facility from a distance. I want to know how many men, what kind of firepower, and whether they're just watching or actively trying to breach the unit." "On it." The convoy slowed, pulling off the highway into a gas station parking lot on the outskirts of Billings, engines idling as Bear relayed instructions to two riders who peeled away toward the storage facility to scout from a safe distance. Emily sat in the truck, her hands twisted together in her lap, watching Jack pace beside the vehicle, his phone pressed to his ear as he coordinated with men she'd known for less than 2 hours, but who had already put their lives on the line for her twice. "Jack," she said when he finally climbed back into the driver's seat, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear me." "I'm listening." "I think I might know where else to look," she said slowly, a memory surfacing that she hadn't thought about in years, buried under decades of a childhood spent trying not to ask too many questions. "There's a locket. My grandmother gave it to me when I turned 18, said it belonged to my mother. I've never been able to open it. The clasp is rusted shut, and I never bothered getting it fixed because I figured it was just sentimental junk." Jack's entire body went still. "A locket, silver oval shaped with a small engraving on the back. I have it in my apartment." "Emily," Jack's voice had gone tight with something between hope and dread. "What does the engraving say?" "I don't remember exactly. Something like..." She closed her eyes, trying to summon the memory. "Together, always, wherever the road leads." "I always thought it was just some sappy anniversary gift." Jack exchanged a look with Bear that carried the weight of sudden electric realization. "Emily, your parents met because your father used to ride a specific stretch of highway outside Billings every week, delivering messages between safe houses. Your mother used to joke that the road was the only thing that ever came between them and a normal life. Wherever the road leads wasn't sentimental. It was a message." "A message to what?" "I think your father built 2 fail-safes," Jack said slowly, piecing it together in real time. "The storage unit, which Victor's people clearly already know about, probably a decoy, or at least something Daniel expected might eventually be compromised. And something else, something only your mother would understand as something tied to that locket. How do we find out the locket's back at my apartment, which is probably being watched too by now?" "We'll figure that out," Jack said. "But first we need to deal with the men currently sitting outside that storage facility, because if they're expecting us to walk into an ambush, the smartest thing we can do is make them think we did exactly that." Bear leaned into the truck window, understanding dawning across his weathered face. "You want to run a diversion?" "I want Victor's men occupied at that storage unit for as long as possible," Jack said. "Give them something to find, something that looks valuable, keeps them digging through boxes and files for hours, while the rest of us get Emily to her apartment, retrieve that locket, and figure out what it actually opens." "I can do that," Bear said. "Preacher and I will take a small team to the facility, make enough noise that Victor's people think the whole operation's converging there. You get Emily out quiet as you can manage." Jack nodded, gratitude and old brotherhood passing silently between the two men before Bear jogged back toward his motorcycle, already relaying new orders to the assembled riders. "This is really happening," Emily said quietly as the convoy began splitting, half the bikers peeling off toward the storage facility, the rest falling into formation around Jack's truck as they turned toward the address Emily gave for her apartment. "This morning I was pouring coffee. Now I'm running from hitmen with an army of bikers as my personal security detail." "I know it's a lot," Jack said, glancing at her with something like guilt crossing his weathered face. "I wish more than anything I could have given you a normal life, Emily. Wish Victor Kane had just let sleeping dogs lie all those years ago and let you grow up never knowing any of this. Don't, Emily said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. Don't apologize for any of this. You've spent 24 years protecting me from a truth I deserve to know eventually. I'm angry and I'm terrified and I don't know how to process any of what's happened today, but I'm not angry at you, Jack. Not for 1 second. Something in Jack's face cracked decades of careful, silent guilt, loosening just slightly at her words. Your father would be proud of you, he said quietly. The way you've handled all this, most people would have fallen apart hours ago. Ask me again in an hour, Emily said, attempting a shaky smile. I reserve the right to fall apart later once we're not actively being hunted. Jack almost laughed, a real laugh, brief and surprised, cutting through the tension for just a moment before his focus snapped back to the road to the mirrors, to the ever-present possibility that danger could reappear at any moment. Emily's apartment building came into view 20 minutes later, and Jack slowed the truck a full block away, studying the street with careful, practiced eyes before proceeding any further. See anything? Emily asked. Nothing obvious, Jack said. But that doesn't mean nothing's there. Stay in the truck. I'll go up, get the locket, come right back down. No, Emily said firmly. It's my apartment, Jack. I know exactly where it is and you don't. We'll waste time if I have to describe it to you over the phone while you're searching. I'm coming with you. Jack looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Emily's expression, steel, that hadn't been there that morning, steel that felt inherited from parents she was only beginning to understand, made him relent. Fine, but you stay behind me. Every step. You understand? Understood. They moved quickly through the building's side entrance, Jack's eyes constantly scanning hallways and stairwells with the same watchful precision he'd shown in the diner up 2 flights of stairs to Emily's small apartment on the 3rd floor. She fumbled with her keys, hands still trembling slightly from the morning's chaos before finally getting the door open. It's in my jewelry box, she said, moving quickly toward her bedroom. Top drawer. She found it exactly where she'd left it weeks ago. A small silver locket tucked beneath a tangle of costume jewelry she rarely wore, and held it up to the light for the first time in years, really studying it, searching for meaning she'd never thought to look for before. Together always, wherever the road leads, she read aloud, running her thumb over the engraved letters. Jack, what does this mean? Where's the road it's talking about? Jack took the locket, carefully turning it over in his massive hands, studying the rusted clasp with narrowed eyes. This needs a locksmith or a very careful hand with a set of tools. But I think, he paused, something clicking into place. Emily, did your mother ever mention a specific place? A cabin, a lake house, anywhere connected to this idea of the road? Emily's mind raced backward again, grasping at fragments of memory too faded and too old to fully trust. There's a photograph, she said slowly. In my grandmother's things, I kept a few boxes when she passed. A picture of my parents standing in front of some kind of old railway sign. I always assumed it was just a random road trip photo. Where's that box now? In my closet. Give me a second. She pulled a battered cardboard box from the back of her closet, hands shaking as she dug through old photographs. Yellowed documents and fragments of a childhood she barely remembered. Until finally her fingers closed around a faded photo of 2 young people, smiling impossibly happy, standing in front of a weathered wooden sign that read Wolf Creek Junction Abandoned, 1987. There, she said, holding it up. This is them. This is my parents. Jack studied the photograph with an intensity that made Emily's breath catch, recognition slowly dawning across his weathered face. Wolf Creek Junction, he murmured. I know that place. Old railroad depot, maybe 30 miles outside the city, shut down decades ago. Your father used to talk about it, sometimes said it was the one place Victor's people would never think to look, because officially, it doesn't even exist on modern maps anymore. You think that's where he hid it, the evidence? I think, Jack said, that this locket is meant to lead someone to Wolf Creek Junction, and once we're there, that clasp probably opens with a very specific key one. Your father likely hid somewhere at that location, something only someone holding this exact locket could ever find. Before Emily could respond, Jack's phone buzzed violently, and his expression shifted instantly from cautious hope to alarm. Bear, he said, answering immediately. Talk to me. The voice on the other end was tense, urgent, carrying the particular strain of a man watching a situation deteriorate in real time. Jack, we've got a problem. Storage units crawling with Victor's men, way more than we anticipated, at least 15, maybe 20. And Jack, Bear hesitated. They're not looking for evidence anymore. Somebody tipped them off that you and Emily aren't here. They're pulling back, and from the chatter we're picking up, it sounds like they know exactly where you're headed next. Jack's blood ran cold. How could they possibly know about Wolf Creek? I don't know, Bear said, but Jack, we've got a leak, a real one. Somebody close to this operation is feeding Victor information in real time, and I don't know who to trust anymore. Emily watched Jack's face harden into something grim and determined, 24 years of careful vigilance, crystallizing into pure focused resolve. We move now, he said, before whoever's leaking information can get another update out. Bear, pull your team back, regroup at the second checkpoint. I'm taking Emily to Wolf Creek myself, just the two of us. No convoy, no chance for information to leak. Jack, that's insane. You'd be going in without backup. Backup is exactly how Victor's people keep finding us. Jack snapped, uncharacteristic frustration bleeding into his voice. I trust you, Bear. I trust Preacher. But right now, I can't trust anyone else, and I'm not risking Emily's life on hope alone. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Bear spoke again, quieter now, resigned. Understood. Be careful, brother. Whatever's out there waiting, it's not going to be nothing. Jack ended the call and turned to Emily, his expression a complicated mixture of fear and fierce determination. We need to move, right now. Just the two of us. Jack, is that really safer? What if they get to Wolf Creek before we do? It's not about safer, Jack admitted. It's about smaller. Fewer people who can compromise us, fewer variables Victor's people can predict. Your father survived 2 years undercover by trusting almost no one, Emily. I think it's time I remembered that lesson. They left the apartment quickly, taking back stairs and side streets, Jack constantly checking mirrors and doorways with a paranoid vigilance that had only intensified since Bear's call. By the time they reached the truck, Emily's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, every shadow suddenly feeling like a potential threat, every parked car a possible ambush waiting to spring. 30 miles, Jack said, pulling out of the parking spot and merging onto a back road that avoided the highway entirely. We should be there within the hour, assuming nobody's already waiting. And if somebody is, Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed grimly on the road ahead. Then we deal with it, same as we've been dealing with everything else today. The drive to Wolf Creek Junction, it took them through increasingly remote country paved roads, giving way to gravel, giving way to little more than a rutted dirt track winding through dense pine forest. Emily watched the landscape grow wilder and more isolated with each passing mile, her nerves fraying with every turn, every shadow beneath the trees that might or might not conceal danger. There, Jack said finally as the trees thinned and an old crumbling structure came into view. The remains of a railroad depot, weathered wood gray, with decades of neglect, rusted tracks disappearing into overgrown brush on either side. It's really here. Emily breathed, something like awe cutting through her fear. This is really the place from the photograph. Jack parked the truck a short distance from the depot, studying the surrounding tree line with careful, practiced eyes before finally nodding, satisfied they were alone. Looks clear, but we move fast and we stay alert. Understood? Understood. They approached the depot together, Emily clutching the silver locket in her fist, her heart hammering with a mixture of grief and anticipation as she stepped into the space where her parents had once stood, young and impossibly happy, in a photograph she'd never understood the significance of until today. Where do we even start looking, she asked, staring at the weathered interior of the old depot, decades of dust and debris scattered across a warped wooden floor. Jack moved slowly through the space, studying the old fixtures, rusted equipment, anything that might hint at a hiding place. Your father was methodical, he said. He wouldn't have chosen this location randomly. There has to be something specific here, some marker that would make sense to someone holding that locket. Emily wandered toward the back of the depot, drawn by some instinct she couldn't quite name, and found herself standing in front of an old, rusted ticket window, the kind that once separated station agents from waiting passengers. Jack, she called, there's something carved here under all this grime. Jack hurried over, and together they cleared away decades of dirt and debris from the wooden frame surrounding the ticket window, revealing faint, deliberately carved initials, DC plus SC. Your parents, Jack breathed. Daniel Carter and Sarah Carter. There's more. Emily set her fingers tracing further, carving beneath the initials, a small, precise symbol that looked almost like a keyhole. Jack, I think this is it. The locket's rusted clasp, when Emily pressed it against the carved symbol, seemed to align perfectly, and with a soft click that felt impossibly loud in the silent depot, the locket finally sprang open. Inside, nestled against faded fabric, was a small brass key. "Oh my God," Emily whispered. "Jack, there's a key." Jack's eyes widened, understanding crashing over him. "A key needs a lock." Emily, look around. Is there anything here that matches this? A safe, a box, anything. They searched the depot with renewed urgency, pulling aside rotted floorboards, checking behind rusted equipment, until finally Emily's fingers brushed against something solid beneath a loose section of flooring near the old ticket window. "Jack, here." Together they pried up the floorboard, revealing a small, weathered metal box, sealed tight with a lock that matched the brass key perfectly. Emily's hand shook so badly it took her 3 attempts to fit the key into the lock, but finally, with a soft grinding click, the box opened. Inside were documents, dozens of them, photographs, financial records, handwritten notes in careful, precise handwriting that Emily somehow instinctively knew belonged to her father. "This is it," Jack breathed, sifting through the papers with reverent, careful hands. "Emily, this is everything. Wire transfers, names, dates. Your father documented years of criminal activity in exhaustive detail. This is more than enough to bring down Victor Kane's entire operation." Emily stared at the evidence spread before her, 24 years of grief and confusion, finally crystallizing into something like purpose. "He really did this," she whispered. "He really gave up everything to make sure this evidence survived." "He did," Jack confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And now finally, after 24 years, we can finish what he started." Before either of them could fully process the magnitude of what they'd found, the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicles approaching cut through the quiet forest engines, growling louder with each passing second. Jack's face drained of color. "They found us. How we were so careful." "Doesn't matter now," Jack said, already moving, sweeping the evidence back into the metal box and pressing it into Emily's arms. "Emily, listen to me very carefully. You need to run. There's a service road behind the depot, leads back toward the highway. Take the truck keys, get to that road, and don't stop until you reach a town, any town, and call the FBI field office number I'm about to give you. I'm not leaving you here alone." "You have to," Jack said fiercely, pressing the keys into her free hand. "That evidence is worth more than my life, Emily. It's worth more than both our lives combined. If Victor's men get their hands on it, everything your father sacrificed means nothing." "Jack, go!" he roared, just as the first vehicles came crashing through the tree line and Emily found herself sprinting toward the back of the depot. Evidence clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face as she heard Jack's voice behind her. No longer frightened, but coldly, dangerously calm. The voice of a man prepared to give everything to protect a promise he'd made 24 years ago. She burst out the back of the depot just as gunfire erupted behind her and didn't stop running. Didn't look back, even as every instinct screamed at her to return, to help, to do something other than flee into the forest, with her father's legacy clutched against her pounding heart. The service road appeared exactly where Jack said it would, and Emily's shaking hands somehow found the strength to start the truck, to pull onto the narrow dirt path, to drive with tears blurring her vision as the sound of gunfire slowly faded behind her. But even as she drove, even as the depot disappeared from her rearview mirror, one thought consumed her, entirely sharp and terrifying and impossible to ignore. Jack was still back there, alone, facing Victor Kane's men, without backup, without support, with nothing but the fierce, unbreakable promise he'd made to a dying friend 24 years ago. And Emily had no idea if she would ever see him alive again. Her phone rang as she reached the edge of the forest, an unknown number flashing across the screen, and with trembling hands she answered it, praying it might somehow be Jack. Somehow be good news in the midst of chaos. Instead, a voice she didn't recognize spoke cold and precise, carrying an authority that made her blood run cold. "Miss Carter," the voice said, "my name is Victor Kane. I believe we have something to discuss, starting with the location of your father's evidence and ending with exactly how much your friend Jack Donovan's life is worth to you." Emily's hands went numb around the phone, the truck drifting slightly on the dirt road before she caught herself, jerking the wheel straight, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought she might be sick. "How did you get this number?" She managed, her voice shaking, despite every effort to sound steady. "Miss Carter, I've had that number for 11 years, Victor Kane said, his voice smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once in his life felt the particular terror currently flooding through Emily's veins. "I make it my business to know things about people who matter to me. And you, my dear, have mattered a great deal for a very long time, long before you ever knew my name. What do you want?" "You already know what I want," Victor said. "Your father's evidence. The documents currently sitting in that metal box on your passenger seat, I'd imagine, given the timeline my men have relayed to me." Emily's stomach lurched. He knew. He knew exactly what she'd found, exactly where she was, exactly what she was carrying. "You're bluffing," she said, though her voice wavered. "You don't know what I have. Miss Carter, I've spent 24 years wondering if this exact moment would ever arrive." Victor said, something almost fond creeping into his cold, measured tone, the kind of fondness a predator might feel for prey it had been patiently stalking for decades. "Your father was the only man who ever truly outmaneuvered me, and I've thought about him nearly every day since he disappeared. So no, I am not bluffing. I know precisely what's in that box, and I know precisely how much it's worth to make certain it never sees a courtroom." "Jack," Emily said, fear for him suddenly overwhelming her own terror. "What have you done to Jack?" There was a pause on the line, deliberate and cruel, before Victor spoke again. "Mr. Donovan is currently alive. Whether he remains that way depends entirely on the choices you make in the next few minutes." "Let me talk to him," Emily demanded, pulling the truck to a stop on the shoulder of the road, her whole body trembling. "I need to know he's okay." Another pause, longer this time, followed by shuffling sounds, and then finally a voice that made Emily's chest crack open with relief and grief simultaneously. "Emily." Jack's voice was strained, breathless, clearly in pain, but alive. Alive. "Don't listen to him. Whatever he's offering, don't." The phone was wrenched away, Jack's voice cutting off abruptly, replaced once more by Victor's cold, unhurried tone. "As you can hear, he's very much alive, though I imagine considerably less comfortable than he was this morning. My men have him secured, and I assure you, Miss Carter, they are extremely capable of making his remaining time on this earth as brief or as prolonged as circumstances require." Emily pressed her free hand against her mouth, trying to hold back a sob, trying to think clearly despite the terror threatening to consume every rational thought in her head. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "Bring me the evidence," Victor said simply. "Come alone, no law enforcement, no other bikers, nothing but you, the box, and your father's final legacy. Do this, and Mr. Donovan walks free. Fail to do this or attempt anything foolish, and I promise you, Miss Carter, he will suffer for a very long time before I allow him the mercy of death. How do I know you'll actually let him go? How do I know you won't just kill us both the moment I hand it over?" "You don't," Victor said simply. "But consider this, Miss Carter, we had 24 years to eliminate you, and I never once succeeded, largely because Jack Donovan proved considerably more resourceful than I anticipated. I have no particular desire to create more martyrs in this story. I want the evidence destroyed quietly, permanently, so I can finally stop looking over my shoulder, wondering when Daniel Carter's ghost might come back to finish what he started. Give me that peace, and I have very little interest in prolonging this conflict further." Emily closed her eyes, every instinct in her body screaming that trusting Victor Kane was insanity, that handing over the evidence would accomplish nothing but ensuring both her father's sacrifice and Jack's had been utterly meaningless. "Where?" she asked. "There's an old grain elevator 18 miles east of your current location," Victor said. "You have 90 minutes. Come alone, Miss Carter. I promise you I will know if you don't." The line went dead and Emily sat frozen in the truck, the metal box heavy in her lap, Jack's terrified voice still echoing in her ears, and for a long, paralyzing moment, she had absolutely no idea what to do. Her phone rang again almost immediately, and Emily nearly dropped it in her haste to answer, praying it might be Jack, somehow calling back, somehow free. Instead, Bear's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Emily, thank God we've been trying to reach Jack for 20 minutes. Nobody's answering." "Bear," Emily said, her voice breaking. "They have him. Victor's men have Jack." A sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a string of curses that would have made Emily blush under any other circumstances. "Where? What happened?" "Wolf Creek Junction. We found the evidence, Bear, everything my father hid, But then Victor's men showed up, and Jack made me run, told me to escape while he held them off, and now Victor's calling me directly telling me to bring the evidence to some grain elevator alone within 90 minutes, or he'll kill Jack. Emily, listen to me very carefully. Bear said, his voice suddenly sharp with focused urgency. Do not go there alone. Do you understand me? Whatever Victor promised you, whatever deal he's offering, it's a trap. The moment you hand over that evidence, you and Jack both become expendable. I know that, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. But what choice do I have? If I don't go, he kills Jack anyway. If I do go, at least there's a chance. There's another option, Bear interrupted. Emily, where exactly are you right now? She gave him her location, hands still shaking on the steering wheel, and heard Bear relaying rapid instructions to someone else on his end before returning to the call. I'm sending Preacher to your location 10 minutes out, Bear said. We're not letting you walk into that grain elevator alone, but we're also not walking in guns blazing and getting Jack killed in the process. There's a smarter way to handle this. What smarter way? Bear hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that told Emily whatever he was about to suggest carried significant risk. Your father spent 2 years building a case against Victor Kane using federal surveillance and careful evidence gathering. What if we finish that case the same way he started it? I don't understand. Emily, I still have contacts from the old investigation, Bear explained. Agents who worked alongside your father before everything went sideways. If we can get you wired, get federal agents in position, and get Victor Kane talking, really talking, admitting to what he's done, what he's planning to do to you and Jack, we might not just save Jack's life. We might finally finish what your father died trying to accomplish. Emily's heart pounded at the audacity of the plan, the sheer risk involved in walking into a confrontation with a wire, trusting that federal agents could mobilize quickly enough, trusting that Victor Kane wouldn't simply kill them both the moment he suspected anything was wrong. Can you actually make that happen in 90 minutes? I can try, Bear said grimly. But Emily, I need you to understand the risk here. If this goes wrong, if Victor suspects for even a moment that you're wired, both you and Jack could be dead before agents ever reach you. Emily thought of her father, a man who had spent 2 years living exactly this kind of danger, who had risked everything every single day to bring men like Victor Kane to justice. She thought of Jack currently being held captive because of a promise he'd made 24 years ago to protect a baby he'd never even gotten to properly meet. Do it, she said, steel. Entering her voice steel, she was only beginning to recognize as an inheritance from parents who had given everything for justice. Whatever you need to do it fast. John, Preacher, arrived exactly as promised. 10 minutes later, along with a woman Emily didn't recognize, sharp-eyed professional, introducing herself simply as Agent Reyes, before immediately getting to work, fitting Emily with a small, nearly invisible wire tucked beneath her shirt collar. This is really happening, Emily whispered, standing in the shade of Preacher's truck, watching federal agents she'd never met before mobilize with an efficiency that spoke to years of training, years of waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. Your father worked with my supervisor 24 years ago, Agent Reyes said, her voice steady and reassuring despite the chaos surrounding them. This case has technically remained open the entire time, Miss Carter, waiting for exactly the kind of evidence you found today. We've been ready to move on Victor Kane for over 2 decades. We just needed enough to make it stick. And now you have it. Now we have everything, Reyes confirmed, checking the wire one final time before straightening Emily's collar, her expression softening slightly with something like empathy. I know this is terrifying. I know you never asked for any of this. But Miss Carter, what you're about to do could end an organization that has caused immeasurable suffering for over 2 decades. Your father would be extraordinarily proud. Emily swallowed hard, trying to summon courage she wasn't entirely sure she possessed. What do I need to do? Get Victor talking, Reyes instructed. Ask questions. Let him think he's won. Let him gloat if he wants to. Men like Victor Kane often can't resist explaining their own brilliance to someone they believe is powerless. The more he admits on record, the stronger our case becomes. But Miss Carter, your safety is our absolute priority. The moment we have enough for an arrest, or the moment we sense any genuine threat to your life, we move in immediately. Understood. Understood. And Jack, Emily asked, her voice cracking slightly. What happens to Jack? Reyes's expression turned serious. We have a secondary team already moving toward Victor's last known holding location, working off cell tower triangulation from the call he made to you. We're going to do everything possible to secure his safety simultaneously. But Miss Carter, I won't lie to you, this is a complex, fast-moving operation. There are no guarantees. Emily nodded, fear and determination warring in her chest as she climbed back into the truck, the metal box containing her father's legacy resting on the passenger seat, a wire hidden beneath her shirt carrying every word she was about to speak directly to federal agents, preparing to finally close a case that had cost her both her parents. 18 miles east, she murmured to herself, starting the engine. 90 minutes. I can do this. The grain elevator rose stark and imposing against the Montana sky, decades of rust and neglect, giving it a haunted, abandoned quality that made Emily's skin crawl the moment it came into view. She parked exactly where Victor's earlier instructions had specified, gripping the metal box with white-knuckled hands. As she stepped out of the truck, every nerve in her body screaming with terror, she forced herself to suppress. Miss Carter. Victor Kane's voice came from the shadows near the elevator's entrance, and Emily's heart nearly stopped as the man himself finally stepped into view. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, despite their remote location, carrying himself with the calm, unhurried confidence of a man who had never once faced meaningful consequences for his actions. "Where's Jack?" Emily demanded, forcing steel into her voice despite the terror threatening to overwhelm her. "Patience," Victor said, gesturing towards two men who emerged from behind the structure, half dragging Jack between them, his hands bound blood-dried along his temple, a fresh bruise darkening one side of his face. But he was alive. Alive and glaring at Victor with an intensity that promised violence the moment he found any opening. "Emily," Jack rasped, "you shouldn't have come." "Quiet!" One of Victor's men snapped, striking Jack across the face hard enough to snap his head sideways. "Don't touch him again," Emily said, fury momentarily overriding her fear. Victor smiled, something cold and amused flickering behind his eyes. "Feisty, just like your mother from what I remember of her." "You knew my mother." "I knew of her," Victor corrected. "Beautiful woman, tragic what happened to her. Car accidents are so unpredictable, don't you think?" The casual cruelty in his voice confirmed everything Jack had suspected. Her mother's death had been no accident, and Victor Kane felt no remorse whatsoever admitting it, even implicitly, standing in the shadow of an abandoned grain elevator. "You had her killed," Emily said, her voice shaking with rage now instead of fear. "I had a loose end eliminated," Victor said with a shrug. "Your mother knew too much, Miss Carter, same as your father before her. In my experience, loose ends have a way of becoming much larger problems if left unaddressed." Emily's mind raced, remembering Agent Reyes's instructions. Keep him talking. Let him explain. Every word was evidence, every casual admission, another nail in the coffin Victor Kane was unknowingly building for himself. "Is that what my father was?" she asked. "A loose end." "Your father," Victor said, something almost respectful entering his voice, despite the venom underlying it, "was the single greatest threat I have faced in 30 years of business. Do you have any idea what it took to build the operation I command today? The relationships, the careful cultivation of officials, judges, law enforcement officers who understood the value of looking the other way. Your father threatened to unravel 2 decades of meticulous work with nothing but his conscience in a federal badge he wasn't even authorized to carry. So you had him killed too." "I gave the order myself," Victor confirmed, no hesitation whatsoever in his admission, arrogance apparently blinding him to the danger of speaking so freely. "Personally supervised the operation that ended his life, in fact. It seemed only fitting, given how much trouble the man had caused me." Emily felt sick, felt rage building in her chest, hot and dangerous. But she forced herself to keep her expression neutral, to keep him talking, remembering Reyes's words echoing in her mind. "Every word he says is evidence. Let him talk." "And the businesses," she said, "the trucking companies, the construction fronts, that's still how you launder money today." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face for the first time. "You seem remarkably well-informed for someone who claims to have only learned about her father this morning." "Jack told me everything," Emily said quickly, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Before you found us, I mean. I know about the trucking companies, the construction outfits, the officials on your payroll." Victor studied her for a long moment, suspicion warring with arrogance, and Emily held her breath, praying he would continue talking rather than growing more cautious. "Impressive research for such a short window of time," he finally said. "Yes, Miss Carter, those businesses remain operational today, generating considerably more revenue than they did 24 years ago, in fact. I've had 2 additional decades to refine the operation your father nearly exposed. 7 trucking companies, now 4 construction firms, and relationships with officials in 11 different counties who understand the value of discretion. Emily's heart pounded with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. Every word Victor spoke was being recorded, transmitted directly to federal agents who were undoubtedly building an ironclad case in real time. "Why tell me all this?" she asked. "Why not just kill us both and be done with it?" Victor smiled, cold and calculating. "Because, Miss Carter, I want you to understand precisely what you're dealing with before you hand over that evidence. I want you to understand that even if by some miracle you manage to escape this exchange, even if you ran to the authorities with wild accusations, there is no one left who could touch me. I own this state, Miss Carter. I have owned it for over 2 decades, and your father's death, your mother's death, and very shortly yours and Mr. Donovan's will simply become 3 more unsolved tragedies in a long, unremarkable list." "You're very confident," Emily said, "for a man about to be recorded confessing to multiple murders." Victor's expression froze, confusion flickering across his face for just a moment before understanding dawned cold and sudden. "What did you say?" "I said, Emily repeated deliberately. "You're very confident for a man who just confessed to murdering my parents on federal recording equipment." For a moment, absolute silence fell over the clearing, Victor Kane's face cycling through shock, fury, and dawning horror as the full implication of Emily's words registered. "You're wired," he breathed. "Federal agents have been listening to every word you've said for the last 10 minutes. Emily said, her voice steady despite the terror flooding through her, despite the very real possibility that Victor's rage might result in immediate violence. "Every admission, every threat, every detail about your operation, it's all on record." Victor's face contorted with fury and he turned sharply toward his men. "Search her now." But before his men could move, the roar of approaching vehicles cut through the tense silence, multiple engines converging on the grain elevator from every direction, followed almost immediately by the unmistakable sound of a helicopter thundering overhead. "FBI, everyone on the ground, hands where we can see them." Chaos erupted instantly. Victor's men scattered, some reaching for weapons, others attempting to flee toward the tree line, while federal agents poured into the clearing with practiced, overwhelming precision. Weapons raised, voices sharp with commanding authority. "Jack!" Emily screamed, watching in horror as one of Victor's men, seeing the operation collapsing around him, grabbed Jack roughly and pressed a gun against his temple. "Nobody move!" the man shouted, backing toward the tree line, dragging Jack with him. "I swear to God, I'll kill him." Agent Reyes emerged from behind one of the vehicles, weapon raised, voice calm and commanding, despite the chaos. "Put the weapon down. There's nowhere to go. Every exit is covered." "I said I'll kill him!" the man screamed, his voice rising with panic, the gun trembling against Jack's temple. Emily's heart stopped, watching Jack's face, not frightened, she realized, but calculating, watching for any opening, any moment of distraction that might give him a chance. And then, with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his size, Jack moved. He drove his elbow backward into his captor's ribs with brutal force, twisting away from the weapon, even as it discharged, the gunshot cracking through the clearing, as Emily screamed, watching Jack collapse to the ground, blood blooming rapidly across his shoulder. "Jack!" Federal agents converged instantly, subduing Victor's man within seconds, while others rushed toward Jack, applying pressure to the wound, shouting for medical assistance. Emily sprinted toward him, dropping to her knees in the dirt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands against the wound alongside the agents. "Jack, stay with me. Please stay with me." "I'm okay," Jack gasped, though his face had gone pale, sweat beading across his forehead, despite the cool afternoon air. "Just a shoulder wound, Emily. Takes more than that to put me down." "You don't look okay," Emily sobbed, watching blood seep between the fingers of the paramedic who had arrived to take over pressure on the wound. "Miss Carter." Agent Reyes appeared beside her, her expression a careful mixture of professional composure and genuine relief. "We have him. Victor Kane is in custody, and we have more than enough evidence between the wire recording and the physical documents to ensure he never sees freedom again." Across the clearing, Emily watched federal agents forcing Victor Kane into the back of an unmarked vehicle, his face contorted with fury and disbelief, the arrogant confidence that had defined him just minutes earlier utterly shattered. It's over, Emily whispered, staring at the man who had killed her parents, who had spent 24 years hunting her without her ever knowing, now finally impossibly facing justice. Not quite over, Reyes said gently. There will be trials, investigations into every business and official connected to his operation. This is going to take months, possibly years to fully unravel. But Miss Carter, because of what you did today, because of the evidence your father protected for 24 years, Victor Kane's entire empire is about to come crashing down. Emily looked down at Jack, still bleeding, but stable paramedics working quickly to stabilize him before transport to a hospital, and felt an overwhelming wave of emotion crash over her grief for parents she'd never truly known. Rage at a man who had stolen so much from her without her even realizing it, and beneath it all, something that felt startlingly like relief. Jack, she said softly, gripping his uninjured hand tightly. We did it. We actually did it. Jack's eyes, glassy with pain and blood loss, found hers, and despite everything, despite the chaos surrounding them, despite the blood soaking through his shirt, he managed a weak, genuine smile. Your father, he whispered, would be so proud of you right now, Emily. So incredibly proud. As paramedics loaded Jack onto a stretcher, preparing him for transport, Emily walked alongside, refusing to let go of his hand, refusing to leave his side, even for a moment. 24 years of separation, finally giving way to a bond neither of them had expected, but both of them now recognized as unbreakable. Behind them, federal agents continued processing the scene, arresting Victor's remaining men, documenting evidence that would take down not just one crime boss, but an entire network of corruption that had operated unchecked for over 2 decades. And somewhere in a place beyond understanding, Emily hoped desperately that her father, the man she'd never known, the man who had sacrificed everything to protect her, could somehow see this moment, could somehow know that his daughter had finally, after 24 years, brought his killers to justice. The ambulance doors closed, sirens beginning to wail as it pulled away from the grain elevator, carrying Jack toward the hospital, toward recovery, toward a future that neither of them could have imagined that morning when Emily had simply been pouring coffee, unaware that her entire life was about to change forever. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, and Emily hadn't moved from her chair in almost 3 hours, her hands still faintly stained with Jack's blood, despite scrubbing them twice in the bathroom down the hall. Family of Jack Donovan, Emily shot to her feet so fast the chair nearly toppled behind her. That's me. I mean, I'm not technically family, but she's family, Bear said firmly, appearing at her shoulder with Preacher close behind. Both men still in their riding leathers, both looking like they hadn't slept in days, despite it only being late afternoon. Whatever the paperwork says, that girl is the only family that man's got left in this world. The doctor, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, glanced between them and seemed to decide arguing wasn't worth the effort. He's stable. The bullet missed anything vital, clipped some muscle tissue, but he was lucky, very lucky. He's asking for someone named Emily. Emily's knees nearly buckled with relief. Can I see him? 5 minutes, then he needs rest. She followed the doctor down a sterile hallway, her heart hammering, with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. And when she finally stepped into the small hospital room and saw Jack propped up against pillows, pale but unmistakably alive, unmistakably glaring at the IV in his arm, like it had personally offended him, something in her chest finally fully unclenched. You look terrible, she said, half laughing, half crying as she rushed to his bedside. Should see the other guy, Jack rasped, managing a weak grin despite the pain evident in his eyes. Emily, you're okay, really okay. I'm okay, she confirmed, gripping his uninjured hand tightly. Because of you, again. That makes it 3 times in one day you've saved my life. Lost count somewhere around lunch, Jack said, though his humor couldn't quite mask the exhaustion, the pain, the sheer weight of 24 years finally catching up to him all at once. Victor, in federal custody, Emily confirmed. Agent Reyes said the recording alone is enough to guarantee multiple life sentences, and that's before they finish going through Dad's evidence. Jack, it's over. It's actually over. Jack's eyes glistened, 24 years of grief and vigilance, finally beginning to loosen their grip on his weathered features. 24 years, he whispered. I kept that promise for 24 years. Emily and I never once let myself imagine what it might feel like the day it was finally finished. How does it feel? Jack considered the question seriously, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that made Emily's breath catch. Feels like I can finally breathe, he said quietly. Feels like your father can finally rest knowing his little girl made it, knowing she's safe. Emily felt tears sliding down her cheeks, grief and gratitude tangling together in a knot she suspected she'd be untangling for years to come. I wish I could have known him, she whispered. Just once, just to say thank you. He knew, Jack said firmly. Whatever you believe about the world beyond this one, Emily, I promise you your father knew exactly what he was protecting. He knew you'd grow up to be someone worth protecting. Today just proved him right. The weeks that followed unfolded in a blur. Emily would later struggle to fully remember. In sequence federal debriefings that stretched for hours, reporters camped outside her apartment building until federal marshals intervened, and an outpouring of information from Victor Kane's collapsing organization that implicated officials across 11 counties, exactly as he'd boasted in that recorded confession. Agent Reyes visited Emily personally 2 weeks after the arrest, sliding a thick folder across the kitchen table in the safe house where Emily had been temporarily relocated during the initial investigation. Your father's full case file, Reyes explained gently, declassified now that Victor's operation has been dismantled. I thought you deserved to see the whole picture, not just the fragments Jack was able to share. Emily opened the folder with trembling hands, staring at photographs of a young man she barely recognized as her father, Daniel Carter, smiling in an old ID photo so young, so achingly ordinary, despite everything he'd secretly carried. He was 26 when he started this, she murmured, reading through commendations, case notes, careful documentation spanning 2 years of extraordinary courage. 26 years old and he did all of this. He was remarkable, Reyes confirmed. I've read through hundreds of informant case files in my career, Miss Carter. I've never seen anything approaching the level of risk your father accepted or the discipline he maintained for as long as he did. This case file will be used as a training example for future agents for years to come. Emily traced her fingers over a photograph of her parents together, young and radiant, utterly unaware of the sacrifice that awaited them both. What happens to Victor now? To everyone connected to him? Trials will take years to fully resolve, Reyes admitted. But between the physical evidence your father preserved and the recorded confession you obtained, Victor Kane will spend the remainder of his life in federal prison. 7 of his business fronts have already been seized. 17 officials across 3 counties have been indicted so far, with more investigations ongoing. 17, Emily repeated softly. My father spent 2 years gathering evidence against 17 corrupt officials, and it took 24 more years in his own death for any of them to finally face consequences. That's not quite accurate, Reyes said gently. It took your courage, Miss Carter. Your father built the foundation, but you're the one who walked into that clearing today and finished what he started. Don't diminish what you accomplished by focusing only on what came before. Emily closed the folder carefully, holding 2 decades of her father's courage against her chest like something precious and fragile. I want to read all of it, she said. Every page. I want to understand exactly who he was. Take your time, Reyes said kindly. There's no rush anymore, Miss Carter. For the first time in 24 years, you actually have the luxury of time. Jack's recovery took nearly 2 months slower than either of them wanted, complicated by an infection that kept him hospitalized longer than expected. Emily visited every single day, sometimes bringing food from the diner, where Marion had insisted on keeping her job open, despite the chaos surrounding her sudden disappearance, sometimes simply sitting beside his bed, reading through her father's case file, sharing pieces of Daniel Carter's story with the one man who had known him best. He used to talk about you, Emily said one afternoon, several weeks into Jack's recovery, looking up from a page in the case file. There's a note here from an agent's debriefing report. Dad told his handler that if anything ever happened to him, Jack Donovan was the only man on earth he trusted completely. Jack's expression softened, old grief still fresh despite the passage of decades. Your father saved my life, once you know. Before any of this started. Bar fight gone wrong, some idiot pulled a knife, and Daniel put heptalons between me and that blade without even hesitating. Never even mentioned it again, after like it was nothing. Sounds like he made a habit of that, Emily said, putting himself between danger and the people he cared about. Guess you inherited that particular habit too, Jack said, gesturing weakly toward his bandaged shoulder. Considering you walked into an ambush, wearing a wire, knowing full well Victor might just shoot you both the moment he suspected something was wrong. I learned from the best, Emily said softly. Both of you. Jack reached for her hand, his grip still weaker than usual but steady, warm, unmistakably present in a way that filled something in Emily that had been empty her entire life. Emily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know there's no wrong answer, whatever you decide. What is it? When I'm discharged from here, Jack said carefully, I don't have much of a life waiting for me. No wife, no kids of my own, spent 24 years so focused on protecting you from a distance that I never let myself build anything else. I understand if that's too much to carry, if you need space to figure out your own life, without an old biker suddenly trying to insert himself into it. But I want you to know, if you'll have me, I'd like to actually be present in your life now. Not from the shadows, not from a diner booth, actually present. Emily felt tears gathering 24 years of loneliness she'd never fully acknowledged, finally finding an answer she hadn't dared hope for. Jack, you spent my entire childhood protecting me without asking for anything in return. You nearly died today, making sure I survived long enough to learn the truth about my father. I think the only wrong answer here would be pretending I don't want you in my life. Jack's eyes glistened, and for the first time since Emily had met him, the careful, watchful stranger from the diner booth allowed himself to simply feel unguarded and raw. Your father asked me to protect his daughter, he said quietly. He never once asked me to love her too. That part, Emily, that part I did entirely on my own. No. 6 months after the confrontation at the grain elevator, Emily stood in a Billings courtroom watching Victor, Kane's sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole, his once imposing confidence utterly shattered, his empire reduced to rubble by evidence her father had protected for over 2 decades. Miss Carter, the judge said before adjourning the proceedings, the court recognizes the extraordinary courage required for you to bring this case to justice, following in the footsteps of a father whose sacrifice made this day possible. This community owes you and Daniel Carter a debt that can never be fully repaid. Emily sat in the gallery beside Jack, whose shoulder had healed enough that he no longer needed the sling, surrounded by dozens of Hell's Angels who had traveled from 3 different states to witness Victor Kane's final downfall. Men who had spent decades honoring a promise to a fallen brother they'd never gotten the chance to properly mourn. It's really over, Emily whispered as Victor was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his eyes finding hers for one final moment, cold fury mixing with something that almost looked like grudging respect. It's over, Jack confirmed, squeezing her hand. Your father can finally rest Emily. So can your mother. So can every single person Victor Kane ever hurt trying to protect his empire. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, cameras flashing as Emily and Jack descended the marble steps together, dozens of bikers forming a protective escort around them, the same brotherhood that had once been sworn to secrecy, now standing proudly in the open, finally free to honor Daniel Carter's memory without fear of retribution. Miss Carter, one reporter called out, what will you do now that justice has finally been served? Emily paused at the bottom of the steps, considering the question seriously, thinking of a father she'd never known, but had come to understand more deeply than she'd ever imagined possible. Thinking of a mother whose courage had matched her husband's in every way, thinking of a man beside her who had sacrificed 24 years of his own life to keep a promise most people would have abandoned decades ago. I'm going to law school, she said, finally surprising even herself with the sudden clarity of the decision. My father spent his life fighting corruption from the shadows, using courage and sacrifice to protect people who never even knew his name. I want to continue that fight, but in the light. In courtrooms where justice can be permanent, documented, impossible to erase or bury. The words felt right the moment she spoke them, a purpose crystallizing from months of grief and discovery into something solid, something her father would have recognized as an extension of everything he'd fought and died in protecting. 3 years later, Emily walked across the stage in a cap and gown law degree, in hand scanning the crowd of proud families until her eyes found exactly who she was looking for. An older man in the front row, gray hair slightly grayer, now weathered face creased with unmistakable pride, still proudly wearing a worn leather vest despite the formal occasion, Hell's Angels patches visible for anyone who cared to notice. Jack Donovan stood as she approached, ignoring the mild scandal his presence caused among some of the more conservative families in attendance, moving forward to meet her at the base of the stage steps, with an urgency that made Emily's heart swell with love that had grown steadily over 3 years of a relationship neither of them had ever properly defined, but both of them had come to depend on completely. You did it, he said, voice thick with emotion as Emily threw her arms around him, diploma still clutched in one hand. We did it, she corrected, pulling back to look at him, 3 years of healing and growth evident in both their faces. Jack, none of this happens without you. Not the trial, not the justice, not this degree. You kept a promise for 24 years that most people would have abandoned after 24 days. Your father would have done the same for me, Jack said simply. Wasn't really a choice, Emily. Just love doing what love does. Emily felt tears sliding down her cheeks. 3 years of complicated grief finally settling into something gentler. Something at peace. She reached up and touched the small silver locket she still wore every day, the same one that had once led her to her father's hidden legacy, now simply a reminder of everything she'd learned about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. I told you I'd been my father's daughter my whole life without knowing it, she said softly. But Jack, I want you to know something else. Somewhere along this journey, whether either of us planned it or not, you stopped being just the man who kept a promise to my father. You became my father, Jack, in every single way that actually matters. Jack's composure finally broke completely, tears streaming freely down his weathered face as he pulled Emily into another embrace, 24 years of silent, invisible protection, finally fully rewarded with a relationship neither of them had dared imagine possible. Pretend, he whispered, echoing words spoken years earlier, in a moment of desperate crisis, words that had once been nothing but a survival tactic and had somehow impossibly become the truest thing either of them had ever said. Kid, you've been my daughter for 24 years. Today just made it official in every way that matters. That evening, Jack and Emily sat together on the porch of a small cabin outside Billings. Not the hidden safe house from the investigation, but a real home now, one Emily had purchased with her first paycheck from the district attorney's office, close enough to Jack's place that they saw each other nearly every day. I've been thinking, Emily said, watching the sun set golden over the Montana mountains, about starting a foundation, using some of the settlement money from Victor's seized assets to help other families who've lost someone to organized crime or corruption or violence they never asked for. Jack turned to look at her, pride evident in every line of his weathered face. What would you call it? The Daniel Carter Foundation, Emily said, for families rebuilding after tragedy, for kids who grow up without answers about parents they lost too young. I want other people to have what I eventually got, the truth, closure, and someone willing to fight for justice, even when it takes decades to arrive. Your father would be so proud of you, Jack said, voice rough with emotion he no longer bothered hiding. I know I keep saying that, Emily, but I need you to understand every single day since that morning in the diner, I've watched you become someone even braver than the man who raised. He paused, correcting himself with a small, warm smile. Someone even braver than the man who died protecting you before he ever got the chance to raise you himself. Emily leaned her head against Jack's shoulder, watching the last light fade behind the mountains, feeling a peace she'd never known was possible after a lifetime of unanswered questions and inherited grief. I used to think I was nobody, she said quietly. Just an ordinary waitress in an ordinary diner, invisible to the world except for the customers who needed their coffee refilled. I never understood why that felt so hollow, why I always sensed something missing, some piece of my own story I couldn't quite access. And now I know exactly who I am, Emily said, steel and warmth combining in her voice in equal measure. I'm Daniel Carter's daughter. I'm Sarah Carter's daughter. I'm the woman who finished what my parents started, who brought Victor Kane's entire criminal empire crashing down, who's spending the rest of her life honoring their sacrifice by fighting for people who need someone brave enough to stand beside them. And you're my daughter too, Jack added softly. Whatever blood says, whatever paperwork, never quite managed to make official. Especially that, Emily agreed, smiling through fresh tears. Especially that Jack Donovan. They sat together in comfortable silence as darkness settled fully over the mountains. Two people bound not by blood but by loyalty. Sacrifice and a promise kept faithfully across 24 impossible years. Proof, if anyone still needed it, that family was never really about the accident of birth, but about the deliberate daily choice to show up, to protect, to love someone through danger and darkness, until the light finally inevitably broke through. Somewhere in Montana, a criminal empire that had operated unchecked for over 2 decades now lay in ruins, its architects serving 4 consecutive life sentences for crimes that had once seemed untouchable. Somewhere in a federal courthouse, 17 corrupt officials faced justice. They'd spent years believing they'd escaped entirely. And somewhere on a quiet porch outside Billings, a father who had never been born and a daughter who had spent 24 years believing herself unwanted finally completely understood the truth that had been waiting for them both since the moment a frightened waitress first poured coffee for a watchful stranger in a roadside diner. Love does not require blood to make it real. Loyalty does not require permission to become sacred. And true family, the kind built through sacrifice, through promises kept, even when no one is watching, through courage that asks for nothing in return, will always eventually find its way home.